screech. That's not a car alarm, it's the sound of someone dragging a key across my Honda like they're signing their name in rage. Why? Because the HOA president decided a few harmless scratches were a threat to the neighborhood's visual harmony. I thought I'd bought a house. Apparently, I'd bought a front row seat to the petty Olympics. From backhanded notices to secret surveillance to full-on sabotage, this woman turned suburban rule enforcement into her personal Marvel villain arc. All I wanted was peace and a driveway. What I got was a slow burn battle of egos, HOA politics, and one plot twist she never saw coming. Stick around and let me know where you're watching from down below. I have a feeling some of you know this pain a little too well. My name is Victor Allen, and 6 months ago, I bought my first real house in Meadowbrook Estates, Texas. After growing up in trailer parks and cramped apartments, owning an actual house felt like winning the lottery. The neighborhood looked perfect: manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and HOA rules thick as a phone book. I work as a security camera installer, so naturally, I set up a small camera system pointing at my own driveway. Just habit, you know. Never thought I'd actually need the footage for anything serious. The house came with a 2-car garage, but I liked keeping my 2020 Honda Accord in the driveway sometimes when I was working on projects. The car had a few minor scratches from city parking, but it was clean and well maintained. I figured as long as I wasn't blocking anyone or breaking actual laws, everything would be fine. That's when I met Linda Peterson. Picture this: 5'4" woman with a blonde bob that looked like it cost more than my monthly car payment, always carrying a clipboard like it was a royal scepter. She wore expensive athleisure wear that screamed, "I have nothing better to do than police my neighbors," and she surveyed the neighborhood every morning like a general inspecting troops. The first time she approached me, I was washing my car in the driveway on a Saturday morning. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'm Linda Peterson, your HOA president. I couldn't help but notice your vehicle has some aesthetic concerns." She pointed at a tiny scratch near the rear bumper that you'd need a magnifying glass to see properly. "Our community standards require that all visible vehicles maintain a certain level of appearance. These scratches are quite unsightly." I looked at my car, then at her, trying to figure out if she was serious. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that was an issue. It's just normal wear and tear from parking downtown." Linda's smile grew tighter. "Well, now you know. I trust you'll address this promptly. We work very hard to maintain property values here." After she left, my neighbor Franklin Dorsey walked over from across the street. Franklin was a 44-year-old electrician with calloused hands and a no-nonsense attitude that came from years of honest work. "Welcome to the kingdom, neighbor," he said with a dry chuckle. "That woman's made 4 families move away in the past 3 years, but you look smarter than most." Franklin had been living in Meadowbrook for 8 years and had his own history with Linda. She tried to fine me for keeping my work truck in the driveway, spent $2,000 on a lawyer, and beat her in court. Turns out HOAs can't restrict legal parking on your own property. The trick is knowing which battles to fight. He glanced toward Linda's house, where she was now photographing someone else's fence. "She's like a shark, always looking for blood in the water. Document everything. Trust me on that." I thanked Franklin for the warning, but honestly, I thought he was being a bit dramatic. How bad could one power-hungry HOA president really be? Over the next few days, I noticed Linda taking photos of my car from different angles. She'd walk by during her morning rounds, stop, pull out her phone, and snap pictures, like she was documenting a crime scene. I also spotted Diane Wilcox, a 33-year-old elementary school teacher who served on the HOA board, watching these interactions from her window with a worried expression. Diane seemed nice enough. She'd wave when she saw me and had even helped when my Amazon packages were delivered to the wrong address. But whenever Linda was around, Diane got this nervous energy, like a student who knows the teacher's in a bad mood. The whole situation felt surreal. I'd grown up poor, moved around a lot, and now that I finally had a nice place to call home, some wannabe neighborhood dictator was treating me like a criminal for having a normal car. But I'm patient by nature. My job requires attention to detail and careful planning. So I decided to give Linda the benefit of the doubt and try to follow whatever rules she thought were important. After all, I just wanted to live peacefully and enjoy finally having my own space. That peaceful attitude lasted exactly 1 week. That's when Linda decided to escalate things in a way that would change everything between us forever. Franklin's warning about documenting everything started making more sense as I watched Linda's behavior become increasingly obsessive. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was hunting for violations, creating problems where none existed. The way she studied my car like it was evidence of some terrible crime told me this wasn't about maintaining community standards. This was personal. This was about power. And Linda Peterson was about to learn that some people don't break as easily as she thought they would. But first, she was going to teach me exactly how far she was willing to go to prove her authority over what she considered her personal kingdom. The real war started over 8 minutes. That's how long I parked on the street while helping an elderly neighbor carry her groceries inside. She was struggling with heavy bags, so when I saw her having trouble, I pulled over and offered to help. By the time I got back to my car, Linda was already there, slapping a bright orange violation notice on my windshield and taking photos from multiple angles like she was documenting a felony. "Excuse me," I said, approaching carefully. "Is there a problem?" Linda turned to me with the kind of smile you'd give a misbehaving child. "Street parking is limited to residents with permits only, and even then, not during peak hours. This is clearly stated in Section 12 of the HOA guidelines." I looked around the nearly empty street. "Peak hours? It's 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday." Linda's smile never wavered. Peak hours are defined as any time when street parking might impede emergency vehicle access or neighborhood traffic flow. She handed me a formal violation notice. "This will be documented with the board. Repeated infractions result in escalating fines." I kept my voice calm, even though my patience was wearing thin. "I was helping a neighbor with groceries. It took less than 10 minutes, Linda shrugged. "Community service is admirable, but it doesn't excuse rule violations. Perhaps next time you could park in your driveway and walk over." That evening, I received a 3-page email from Linda detailing my pattern of disregard for community standards. She'd apparently been documenting every time I'd parked slightly outside what she considered the optimal position, every time I'd washed my car during inappropriate hours, and even the fact that my car had visible wear and damage that negatively impacts neighborhood aesthetics. The email read like I was running a criminal operation, not just living quiet. But here's the thing about my job. I document everything. So I started taking photos of my own car, my parking positions, and yes, I began recording HOA meetings on my phone. Public meetings are fair game legally, and something told me I was going to need evidence later. At the next board meeting, Linda presented a slideshow about community standards. My car starred in half the slides. "As you can see," she told the 5-person board, clicking through images of my supposedly offensive vehicle, "repeated violations of our aesthetic guidelines create a domino effect that can impact property values for everyone." Diane Wilcox shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I mean, Victor seems nice enough. The violations seem pretty minor." She caught herself mid-sentence, her cheeks reddening slightly. "I mean, the car issues seem minor." Interesting slip there. Apparently Linda had been talking about me enough that my name was on Diane's mind. Franklin had warned me this would happen, but he also gave me some crucial advice. "She did this exact same thing to the previous family," he explained while we stood in my driveway after the meeting. "Started with parking complaints, escalated to aesthetic violations, then property damage claims. They moved out after 6 months because they couldn't handle the stress." He pulled out a folder from his truck. "But here's the thing. I beat her once before. She tried to fine me for keeping my work truck in the driveway. Spent $2,000 on a lawyer, but we proved she was exceeding her authority. HOAs can regulate some things, but they can't override basic property rights." Franklin's strategy was simple. Let Linda hang herself with her own rope. Document everything, stay calm, and let her show everyone what kind of person she really is. These people always overplay their hand eventually. I took his advice to heart, but I also started thinking more strategically. If Linda wanted to play games, I could play games too. I just needed to be smarter about it. The next escalation came the following Sunday when I decided to wash my car in my driveway at 7:30 in the morning. I figured early morning would be considerate, no noise complaints from neighbors who might be sleeping in. Wrong. Within an hour, I had another email from Linda complaining about excessive noise during quiet hours and wasteful water usage that violates our environmental responsibility guidelines. She'd also started a petition among neighbors about my disruptive behavior. I found out about the petition when Diane stopped by later that day. "I'm really sorry about all this," she said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "Linda can be intense about the rules, but she means well, I think. I decided to test something." "I appreciate you saying that, Diane. Honestly, I just want to fit in here. This is my first real home, you know? I grew up pretty poor, and having a place like this means everything to me." Diane's expression softened. "That's really sweet. You seem like a good neighbor. Maybe I could talk to Linda, help smooth things over. Perfect. I was starting to understand the dynamics here. I'd appreciate that. I just hope she doesn't do anything too crazy, you know? Sometimes when people feel powerful, they make decisions they end up regretting. Diane looked troubled by that comment, which was exactly what I wanted. Seeds planted, now I just had to wait for them to grow. That night, Franklin came over with a beer and a knowing grin. "You're learning, kid. Plant the idea, let her water it herself." He'd been watching the whole situation unfold and could see I was thinking more tactically now. Linda's biggest weakness is her ego. She can't resist showing everyone how much control she has. Keep playing the innocent victim, and she'll eventually do something so outrageous that even her supporters turn against her. I was starting to understand that this wasn't really about my car or parking violations. This was about power, control, and Linda's need to feel superior to everyone around her. But two could play that game, and I had advantages she didn't know about yet. My job had taught me patience, attention to detail, and the importance of gathering solid evidence before making any moves. Linda was operating on emotion and ego. That would be her downfall. That night, as I reviewed Linda's email again, something shifted inside me. This wasn't a dispute anymore. It was a siege. And if I wanted to protect my home, I couldn't just endure. I had to outthink her. As I watched Diane walk away, still looking troubled by my comment about people making regrettable decisions, I knew the psychological warfare had begun. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let them think their prey is helpless. Linda was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Linda's next move was pure psychological warfare. She started a campaign on the neighborhood's private online group, posting vague messages about certain residents who seem to think rules don't apply to them, and the importance of maintaining standards even when some people resist positive change. I took screenshots of every post. My job has taught me that digital evidence disappears fast if you're not careful. The posts were clever enough to avoid naming me directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Neighbors stopped waving. Some avoided eye contact. Others buried their faces in their phones. Linda was isolating me systematically, and it was working. Even the elderly neighbor I'd helped with groceries apologized to me one day. "I'm sorry if helping me got you in trouble with the HOA," she said sadly. "I don't want to cause problems for you." That made my blood boil. Linda was making an innocent old woman feel guilty for accepting help with groceries. This had gone way beyond petty rule enforcement. This was deliberately cruel. The real escalation came when I went on a 2-day work trip to install security systems at a corporate office in Houston. I parked my car legally in my driveway before leaving, maybe 4 inches past what Linda considered the optimal position, but well within my property lines. When I got back, I found a notice on my windshield claiming my car was blocking sightlines for emergency vehicles and creating safety hazards for pedestrian traffic. But that wasn't the worst part. Linda had hired a contractor to paint what she called official parking guidelines on the street, conveniently positioned so that my normal parking spot was now technically illegal according to her new rules. And here's where it gets really twisted. My car had fresh scratches that definitely weren't there when I left. Deep gouges along the passenger side that looked intentional, not accidental. Linda used the new scratches in her violation report, proof, she claimed, of neglect and visual degradation. The woman had actually damaged my car herself and then used that damage as justification for further harassment. I'll admit, that's when I started getting angry. Not just annoyed or frustrated, genuinely angry. But Franklin had taught me to channel that anger productively. I installed a second, more obvious camera system that Linda would definitely notice, positioning it so she'd focus on disabling the fake setup while my real cameras stayed hidden. "Smart move," Franklin said when he saw my new arrangement. "They'll spend so much time worrying about the decoy, she won't look for the real surveillance." I also started building a detailed timeline of Linda's harassment, printing out emails, organizing photos, and creating a clear paper trail of her escalating behavior. If this was going to court eventually, I wanted to be prepared. But more importantly, I was starting to understand Linda's psychology. She needed to win publicly, needed everyone to see her exercise control over me. That need for public validation would eventually be her downfall. The next HOA board meeting was where Linda really showed her true colors. She demanded a $500 fine for my repeated and willful violations of community standards, presenting a slideshow that would make a prosecutor jealous. Photos of my car from every angle, printed emails with highlighted sections, even a diagram showing how my parking allegedly impacted traffic flow on our quiet residential street. "This isn't about personal vendetta," Linda announced to the board, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "This is about maintaining civilization. Property values are at stake. If we allow one resident to flagrantly disregard our standards, where does it end?" Diane tried to interject. "Linda, these seem like pretty minor issues. Maybe we could just have a friendly conversation with Victor instead of formal fines?" Linda turned on her with surprising viciousness. "Diane, your soft approach is exactly why problems escalate. Sometimes people need firm guidance to understand their place in a civilized community." The room got uncomfortable. Even the other board members exchanged glances. Linda was revealing something ugly about herself, and people were starting to notice. After the meeting, I played my next psychological card. I told Diane I was seriously considering moving away. "Maybe Linda's right," I said, making sure I sounded defeated. "Maybe I just don't belong in a nice neighborhood like this. I thought I'd finally made it, but I guess some people like me are meant to rent apartments forever." Diane looked genuinely distressed. "Victor, don't say that. This is your home. You have every right to be here. Don't let her push you out like she did the others." Bingo. Diane had just confirmed that Linda had done this before, and she felt guilty about not stopping it. "I just wish there was a way to show her I'm not her enemy," I continued. "I mean, I hope she doesn't do anything really crazy, you know? Sometimes when people have too much power, they make decisions they regret later." That comment stuck with Diane. I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to worry about what Linda might do next, which meant she was finally seeing Linda's behavior as potentially dangerous rather than just strict. Meanwhile, Linda was getting more confident by the day. She started bragging to neighbors about her successful intervention with problem residents. I overheard her telling people about how firm leadership was necessary to maintain community standards. She even had the audacity to suggest I was probably looking for excuses to move anyway, because some people just aren't suited for upscale living. The woman's ego was inflating dangerously, and she was starting to believe her own propaganda. The psychological game was working perfectly. Linda thought she was winning. Diane was questioning Linda's methods, and I was gathering evidence while maintaining my reputation as the reasonable victim. All I had to do now was wait for Linda to overplay her hand, and knowing her ego, that wouldn't take long. Linda told everyone I was learning my place. She had no idea I was about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. My strategy crystallized over the next few days as I watched Linda's pattern more carefully. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was systematically destroying people who didn't show her proper deference. Target someone new, isolate them from community support, escalate enforcement until they either submitted completely or left. It was actually brilliant in a sociopathic way. But every system has weaknesses, and Linda's weakness was her need for public validation. She couldn't just win quietly. She had to make sure everyone watched her win. That need for an audience would be her undoing. I started setting up my endgame by installing additional cameras with better night vision capabilities and wider angles. My security company had access to professional-grade equipment, so I positioned 3 hidden cameras that could capture my entire driveway and car from multiple angles. If Linda wanted to escalate this to property damage, I'd have evidence that would hold up in any courtroom. But more importantly, I'd have evidence that would destroy her reputation in the court of public opinion. The 4th major escalation came when Linda called a tow truck on my legally parked car. I'd parked overnight in my own driveway, exactly where I always parked, but Linda claimed it was blocking emergency access routes and constituted a safety hazard requiring immediate intervention. The tow truck driver seemed confused when he arrived. "Ma'am, this car is on private property, legally parked. I can't tow it without police authorization or clear evidence of violations." Linda became increasingly agitated, finally convincing him by claiming she had HOA authority and promising to handle any legal issues. It cost me $200 to get my car back from the impound lot, and I missed an important work video call with a potential client. But Linda's mistake was celebrating too openly afterward. She told multiple neighbors that the parking problem would be resolved soon, and made comments about how some people need stronger encouragement to respect community standards. Franklin witnessed her saying that difficult residents usually get the message after a few firm interventions. Linda was essentially confessing to harassment, and she was doing it in front of witnesses. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling the police or filing complaints with the city, I was going to give Linda exactly what she wanted: a public forum to demonstrate her power. I announced I was calling a community reconciliation meeting where I would apologize to everyone and try to make amends for any problems I'd caused. Linda was so excited she could barely contain herself. "That's exactly what this community needs," she told Diane. "Sometimes people need to publicly acknowledge their mistakes before real healing can begin." She immediately began preparing what she called her resolution presentation, essentially a victory speech designed to humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. Perfect. Linda thought she was walking into her coronation ceremony. She had no idea she was walking into her own execution. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening at 7 p.m. in the community center. I spent the day making my final preparations, testing camera equipment, and organizing my evidence. Franklin stopped by with a beer and a nervous grin. "You sure about this strategy, kid? Once you trigger this, there's no going back. She's going to come at you with everything she's got." I appreciated his concern, but I'd moved beyond anger into cold calculation. "Franklin, you don't understand narcissists like I do. They can't resist a victory lap. Linda has spent months building up to this moment where she gets to publicly break me. She'll want to make it as dramatic and decisive as possible." Franklin looked at my equipment setup and shook his head. "You got balls, I'll give you that. Hope you got brains to match." I did. Everything was coming together perfectly, and Linda was about to hand me everything I needed to destroy her completely. Meanwhile, Diane was having her own crisis of conscience. She'd witnessed Linda's joy over the towing incident and was starting to question whether this was really about maintaining standards or just about power. When I mentioned the reconciliation meeting to her, she looked genuinely conflicted. "Maybe this will help everyone move past the conflict," she said hopefully. "Linda seems really committed to finding a resolution." I planted one final seed. "I hope so. I just want everyone to understand what really happened here. Tomorrow night, the whole truth is going to come out." Diane didn't know what I meant by that, but something in my tone made her nervous. Good. I needed her to be questioning Linda's motives when the moment of truth arrived. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Linda was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Franklin warned me, "Delusional leaders justify anything. She's nearly there." As I did my final equipment check that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. Linda had spent months trying to break me, but instead she'd taught me something valuable about patience, strategy, and the power of letting people destroy themselves. Tomorrow night, everyone would see who Linda Peterson really was under that perfect blonde hair and fake community leader persona. And the beautiful part was, she was going to expose herself completely, voluntarily. Sometimes the best trap is one where the predator thinks they're walking into their coronation ceremony. That night, Linda went to bed planning my destruction. Little did she know, she was about to destroy herself. Linda's attack came at exactly 2 a.m. on the night before our scheduled community meeting. My cameras captured everything in crystal clear high definition, but I didn't know that yet. I was sleeping soundly, dreaming about finally having peace in my neighborhood, when Linda Peterson crept out of her house like a thief in the night. She'd planned this carefully, dressed in dark clothes, carrying a plastic bucket of white paint and a set of keys she'd probably sharpened specifically for the occasion. The woman moved with purpose, like someone who'd been fantasizing about this moment for weeks. Phase 1 took her 3 minutes. Deep scratches carved into every panel of my car, methodical and thorough, the sound of metal against metal cutting through the quiet night air. Phase 2 was 2 minutes of pure vandalism. White paint poured over the hood and windshield, dripping down the sides like abstract art created by hatred. Phase 3 was personal. "Get out," written along the driver's side with permanent marker, the letters bold and unmistakable. Her finale was slashing 2 tires with a box cutter, the sharp hiss of escaping air punctuating her declaration of war. Linda stood back to admire her work for a full 30 seconds before creeping back to her house, probably convinced she'd just solved the Victor problem once and for all. I discovered the damage at 6:30 a.m. when I walked outside to head to work. The sight hit me like a physical blow. My car, my first decent car that represented everything I'd worked for, completely destroyed. My coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the driveway, the crash echoing in the morning silence. For a moment, everything stopped. No birds singing, no distant traffic, just the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I stared at Linda's handiwork. Then something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic smirk, but genuine satisfaction, because Linda had just handed me everything I needed to destroy her completely. "She actually did it," I whispered to myself, pulling out my phone to call Franklin. "A crazy woman actually did it." Franklin answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Victor, what time is it?" I couldn't keep the excitement out of my voice. "She did it, Franklin. She actually went through with it. Completely destroyed my car." There was a pause. "Jesus, Victor, are you okay? That's criminal behavior." I was better than okay. I was vindicated. "This is perfect, Franklin. She just committed a felony on camera. Game over." I spent the next hour documenting everything with professional thoroughness, taking photographs from every angle with timestamps and measurements. The damage was extensive, thousands of dollars in bodywork, 2 new tires, complete paint job needed, but more importantly, it was clearly intentional vandalism, not random crime or accident. The scratches were too systematic, the paint placement too deliberate, the message too personal. This wasn't some random criminal, this was targeted harassment escalated to property destruction. I downloaded the security footage onto my laptop and multiple backup drives, reviewing the crystal clear evidence of Linda's midnight raid. She'd been careful about not showing her face directly to most cameras, but my hidden angles had captured enough to make identification certain. More importantly, the footage showed her moving with familiarity around my property, taking her time, acting like she had every right to be there. This wasn't impulsive vandalism. This was premeditated destruction by someone who felt entitled to punish me for not submitting to her authority. Linda's victory lap began at 9 a.m. I watched from my window as she made her rounds through the neighborhood, stopping to chat with various residents. Her body language was different, more confident, more satisfied. She was practically glowing with achievement. When she talked to Diane, I could see her gesturing toward my house and shaking her head with mock sympathy. "Some people need clearer messages about community standards," she was probably saying. "Sometimes tough love is the only language certain individuals understand." To other neighbors, she made comments about how problems have a way of resolving themselves when people finally understand consequences. The woman was essentially confessing to harassment in broad daylight, but she was so high on her perceived victory that she couldn't contain herself. This was exactly what Franklin had predicted. Linda's ego wouldn't let her win quietly. She had to make sure everyone knew she'd won, which meant she was broadcasting her guilt to the entire neighborhood. I spent the day maintaining my act as the devastated victim. When neighbors asked about my car, I played it perfectly. "Yeah, someone really doesn't want me here. I guess I'm getting the message loud and clear." The response was exactly what I hoped for. Several people expressed sympathy and outrage that someone would do such a thing. A few even mentioned they'd noticed Linda seemed unusually cheerful today, which struck them as odd given the circumstances. One neighbor brought me homemade cookies and told me she was sorry this was happening to me. "You're such a nice young man," she said sadly. "I don't understand why anyone would be so cruel." Neither did I. But I was about to make sure everyone else understood exactly who was responsible. I didn't call the police, yet that evidence would be much more powerful when revealed at tonight's meeting. Linda thought she was walking into a celebration of her victory. Instead, she was walking into the moment that would destroy her reputation forever. By 6 p.m. I was ready, laptop charged and loaded with footage, backup drives prepared, photos organized, and my presentation mentally rehearsed. Franklin stopped by to check on me one final time. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, looking at my destroyed car with disgust. "She's gonna come in there thinking she's already won. When you drop this bomb, she's gonna lose her mind completely." I nodded, feeling calmer than I had in months. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Linda's biggest weakness is her need to control the narrative. When that narrative gets shattered in front of everyone she's trying to impress, she'll reveal who she really is, underneath all that fake community leader act. Franklin grinned and shook his head. "Remind me never to cross you, kid. You're scarier than she is when you put your mind to it." As evening approached and neighbors began walking toward the community center, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Linda had spent months systematically trying to break me, but instead, she'd taught me something valuable about patience, strategy, and the power of letting people hang themselves with their own rope. As Linda walked into that meeting room with her victory smile, she had no idea she was walking into her own funeral, and I was about to be the undertaker. The community center filled up quickly that evening. 15 neighbors showed up, including all 5 HOA board members, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. Linda arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a folder thick with documents and wearing her most professional outfit, a navy blazer that screamed, "Serious community leader." She'd prepared extensively for this moment, probably practicing her victory speech in the mirror. Diane looked nervous as she took her seat, glancing between Linda's confident smile and my unusually calm demeanor. Franklin positioned himself near the back, arms crossed, ready to watch the show. I started the meeting with perfect humility, standing before my neighbors like a man who'd been thoroughly defeated. First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know there's been tension in our community, and I take full responsibility for my part in that conflict. I called this meeting because I want to publicly apologize and try to make things right with everyone, especially Linda, who's been working so hard to maintain our neighborhood standards. Linda practically glowed with satisfaction. This was going exactly as she'd envisioned. Linda stood to deliver her prepared remarks, and I could see she'd been looking forward to this moment for months. "Thank you, Victor, for finally acknowledging the importance of community cooperation," she began, her voice carrying the tone of a parent addressing a misbehaving child. "What we've seen over the past several months is a perfect example of why strong leadership is essential for maintaining the quality of life we all expect in Meadowbrook Estates." She launched into a detailed recitation of my supposed violations, describing each incident with suspicious accuracy and enthusiasm. The repeated parking infractions, the aesthetic violations, the resistance to reasonable guidance, these behaviors create a domino effect that threatens everyone's property values and quality of life. As she spoke, I noticed something interesting. Linda knew details about my car's condition that she should have had no way of knowing. She described scratches with precision, mentioned specific locations of damage, and spoke about the deteriorating appearance with the expertise of someone who'd examined the vehicle very closely indeed. Diane was the first to notice something odd. "Linda," she interrupted gently, "those scratches you mentioned, I saw Victor's car this morning after what happened to it. Those scratches looked really fresh. How did you know about all the specific damage?" The room got quiet. Linda's momentum faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Well, I observe everything in our community very carefully. It's my responsibility as HOA president to monitor potential violations and safety concerns." But Diane wasn't satisfied with that answer. She was a teacher, trained to notice when students weren't telling the truth, and something about Linda's explanation didn't add up. "But you described the paint damage too. You mentioned white paint specifically. How did you know the paint was white?" The silence in that room was deafening. Linda realized she'd walked into a trap, but she couldn't figure out how to escape without admitting knowledge she shouldn't have. "I meant when I checked this morning for community safety purposes." Diane pressed harder, and I could see the teacher in her taking over. "You checked his car for violations at what time this morning, Linda?" That's when Linda's carefully constructed facade began to crack. The pressure of being questioned publicly, combined with her desperate need to maintain authority, created the perfect storm. "Fine," she snapped, her voice rising to a near shout. "Someone needed to teach him a lesson. These people come into our neighborhood and think rules don't apply to them." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but Linda was too far gone to stop herself now. "I was protecting our property values. I was maintaining the standards that make this community worth living in. Someone had to take action when the official channels weren't working fast enough." She was confessing to everything, right there in front of 15 witnesses, and she didn't even realize it. The teacher and Diane took over completely. "Linda, are you saying you vandalized Victor's car?" Linda's eyes darted around the room as she realized what she'd just admitted. That's not... You don't understand the pressure I'm under to maintain community standards." But it was too late. The words were out there, and everyone had heard them. I waited for the perfect moment, then calmly opened my laptop. "Actually, Linda, I think everyone should see exactly what happened last night." I didn't make a big speech or dramatic announcement. I simply pressed play and let the evidence speak for itself. The footage was crystal clear. Linda creeping across my driveway at 2 a.m., methodically destroying my car with keys and paint, taking her time like she was conducting community business. The room watched in complete silence as their HOA president systematically vandalized a neighbor's property, her movements deliberate and thorough. When the video ended, the silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Then the explosion came. "Oh my God, Linda," Diane's voice cut through the quiet. "How could you do this?" Other neighbors started talking at once. "This is insane. I can't believe what I just saw." She actually destroyed his car. Linda tried desperately to regain control. "You don't understand. He was ruining everything we've worked to build here. Someone had to take decisive action." But her explanations only made things worse. Every word out of her mouth was digging her grave deeper. Several neighbors stood up and walked out immediately, unwilling to listen to any more of Linda's justifications. Others pulled out their phones, probably to call family members or post about what they'd just witnessed. Franklin remained seated, but I could see him shaking his head in disgust. Diane didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there in front of everyone. Yes, I need to report a crime. We have video evidence of someone vandalizing a neighbor's car. Linda's world was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it happening. She tried to interrupt Diane's call, tried to convince people that they didn't understand the full situation, tried to maintain some shred of authority, but it was over. Her mask had been ripped off in front of the entire community, and there was no putting it back on. As I packed up my laptop and prepared to wait for the police, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd gotten revenge. Revenge implies wanting to hurt someone who didn't deserve it. This was justice. Linda had spent months systematically trying to destroy my life, and I'd simply given her enough rope to hang herself. In that moment of perfect silence, Linda finally understood what checkmate feels like. And the best part? She'd played herself completely. The police arrived in exactly 10 minutes, which was probably a record for our quiet suburban neighborhood. The responding officer was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd seen everything during her years on the force, but even she seemed surprised by the situation she'd walked into. "So let me understand this correctly," she said, reviewing my laptop footage for the third time. "The defendant is the HOA president. This is her third viewing of the evidence, and she committed this crime immediately before a public meeting where she planned to humiliate the victim?" I nodded, trying to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "That's correct, officer. She'd been escalating harassment for months, and I think she saw this as her final solution to what she called the Victor problem." Linda sat in the corner of the community center, completely broken down. Her perfect blonde hair was disheveled, her hands were shaking uncontrollably, and she kept muttering incomplete sentences about community standards and property values. The confident HOA president from an hour ago had been replaced by a woman who looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. When the officer approached her with handcuffs, Linda couldn't even form coherent words. The community, he wouldn't standards. It was painful to watch, but also exactly what she deserved. The sight of Linda Peterson being handcuffed in front of the entire neighborhood was something none of us would ever forget. The officer read her rights, while Linda stared blankly ahead, probably still trying to process how completely her life had just imploded. The charges were serious: criminal mischief in the first degree, harassment, and property destruction, felonies that would follow her forever. The financial consequences were equally devastating. My car would cost $22,000 to repair or replace, and that didn't include punitive damages or legal fees. Linda's insurance might cover some of it, but deliberate criminal acts usually void coverage, which meant she'd be paying out of pocket. For a woman whose authority had been built on the perception of superiority and control, being led away in handcuffs while her neighbors watched was the ultimate humiliation. Deanne actually started crying as they loaded Linda into the patrol car. "I never thought she could be so mean," she whispered. "She always seemed so put together and professional." I maintained my composure throughout the entire arrest process, giving my statement to the officer with calm professionalism. "I just wanted this harassment to stop," I told her honestly. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt or arrested. I just wanted to live peacefully in my neighborhood." Several neighbors approached me afterward to apologize for not speaking up sooner. "We should have known something was wrong when she kept targeting you," said one resident. "Linda's always been controlling, but this crossed every line." Diane was especially apologetic, her teacher instincts making her feel responsible for not protecting a community member. "I knew something felt wrong about how she was treating you, but I never imagined she was capable of this level of cruelty." The most satisfying part wasn't Linda's arrest. It was watching the community realize how toxic their HOA president had been and how complicit they'd become in her harassment campaign through their silence. The immediate aftermath moved quickly. An emergency HOA board meeting was called for the following evening, where Linda was unanimously removed from all positions and Diane was elected as interim president. Her first official act was implementing new policies, transparent rule enforcement, formal appeals processes for violations, and behavioral standards for board members that included immediate removal for harassment or abuse of power. "We're going to run this HOA like a genuine community organization," Diane announced, "not like someone's personal kingdom." New signs went up throughout Meadowbrook Estates. "Respectful community standards. No abuse of power will be tolerated." The transformation was remarkable. Within a week, the entire atmosphere of the neighborhood had changed, from fear-based compliance to actual neighborly cooperation. People started talking to each other again instead of worrying about being reported for imaginary violations. Linda's legal consequences unfolded over the following months with predictable severity. She was convicted on all charges, sentenced to community service and probation, and ordered to pay full restitution plus additional damages. The financial impact was devastating. Legal fees combined with my settlement drained her savings completely. Her husband, who'd been largely absent during her HOA reign of terror, filed for separation within 6 weeks. He later told Franklin that he'd been embarrassed by Linda's behavior for years, but never thought she'd cross into actual criminal activity. The social consequences were even more complete. Former friends stopped returning her calls, her position in various community organizations evaporated overnight, and she became a cautionary tale throughout the suburban HOA network. Within 3 months, Linda was forced to sell her house at a loss and move to a small apartment across town where she worked part-time at a retail store to pay her legal debts. The mighty HOA president had fallen about as far as humanly possible. My victory, meanwhile, was both practical and satisfying. Insurance plus Linda's settlement payment allowed me to upgrade to a beautiful new Acura TLX, which I parked proudly in my driveway every day. More importantly, I'd gained the respect and friendship of my neighbors, who regularly stopped by to chat and often asked for my advice on dealing with other community issues. My experience with Linda had taught me valuable lessons about patience, strategy, and the power of documentation that served me well in my security business. Several neighbors hired my company for their own camera installations, joking that they wanted the Victor Allen level of protection. The reputation I gained from handling Linda's harassment professionally actually grew my business significantly. Franklin became one of my closest friends, and we often sat on my porch in the evenings, enjoying the peace that came from living in a neighborhood where people treated each other with basic human decency. 3 months after Linda's arrest, I was enjoying my morning coffee on the front porch when I noticed a moving truck in front of Linda's old house. A young couple with a toddler was moving in, clearly excited about their new home and what they probably thought was a perfect suburban neighborhood. I walked over to introduce myself and offer help with boxes, which led to a friendly conversation about the community. "The HOA seems really reasonable here," the husband mentioned. "The president, Diane, was so welcoming when we met her. She said the previous president had some issues, but things are much better now." I smiled and agreed that yes, things were definitely much better now. As I headed back to my house, Franklin joined me, carrying his own coffee mug. "Much quieter around here without Queen Linda," he said with a satisfied grin. "Amazing how much more peaceful a neighborhood can be when the biggest troublemaker gets removed." We stood there for a moment, looking at our quiet street, where people were washing cars, walking dogs, and living their lives without fear of petty tyranny. So that's how you handle an HOA Karen who thinks she can destroy your life. Document everything, stay patient, let them destroy themselves with their own arrogance, and never let bullies convince you that their abuse is normal or acceptable. Linda Peterson learned that lesson the hard way, and her story became a legend in our neighborhood about what happens when power-hungry people finally face consequences for their actions. Justice isn't always fast, and it isn't always guaranteed, but when it comes for people like Linda, it's absolutely beautiful to watch. If you're dealing with your own neighborhood bully, remember, patience beats rage, evidence beats emotions, and sometimes the best revenge is simply letting karma work through the legal system. Comment below if you want to hear more stories about standing up to people who think their authority makes them untouchable. Trust me, I've got plenty more where this came from.